Howdy, all. We have a guest today, and he is a veteran of press conferences in Toronto. As I'm not as much of a veteran, but I've been exposed to the beauty that is the Toronto media. And, and it was funny because the Maple Leafs held a press conference this morning to announce. Well, they'd already announced it, but the new logo that had come out, which I think is very very good looking, and it's a
I like it.
it's a throwback. If I can pull it up on my phone, I'll show it. But it's a throwback logo, and it looks really nice. And they updated the lettering and everything. So it's, I think they're going away from the Ballard era and anything that had to do with the Ballard era in the last 48 years of losing, and they're trying to go back and respect the history and maybe hopefully chart a new direction. But one of the Toronto reporters, it was a television reporter who's been on the scene for a long time, in a press conference with Brendan Shanahan, asked him the fact that apparently, he says, Steven Stamkos has given a thumbs up to the new Leafs logo. Any response? And apparently Shanahan gave a death stare, like a 2 to 3 second death stare at the reporter, and just said no, and then moved on. I mean, do they actually do some of these reporters? And I would never ask that question, and I'm not criticizing them, and I know that they want to get something sensational, but do they really expect an NHL executive to answer that kind of question, Joe?
Well, no, I don't think they do, and I think for them you're trying to get a rise, you're trying to get a quote, you're trying to get something. It's part of the hustle in Toronto is trying to get anything you can to create some kind of news. And you know what, the Stamkos thing is just it's going to feed itself until something is resolved, until either he's traded, and then once he's traded, it won't be resolved until he's signed to a new contract. So this is just, I mean, I don't want to call it Toronto typical, because it's not. I mean, it's not how it goes. But in a season where things are going as bad as they are for the Leafs, the hope of bringing home the hometown guy and starting that climb towards maybe one day making a run at the Stanley Cup. I mean, this is kind of what you have to expect. It's gonna be crazy like this until at least July 1st.
Yeah, I saw that face there, Russ.
Well, here's the thing. We all remember Brendan Shanahan as a player, and he would have good days and bad days in the media as a player. So just knowing that, this reporter clearly doesn't cover a lot of hockey if he's going to ask Shanahan a question like that and expect to get an answer.
Yeah, but I have a feeling, and I'm not going out on a limb here. After February 29th, and I don't expect Stamkos to be traded because Tampa has gotten their act straight. They're playing better. I think they have a legitimate chance in the East. It's them and Washington and maybe one or two other teams as reasonable candidates to go to the Stanley Cup final. I think it's going to get worse after the deadline if he doesn't get moved, because the last 6 weeks of the regular season for the Maple Leafs is only going to be how many games can they lose and where are they going to finish. That's all that's going to be. I mean, they're going to trade 6-7 players off the roster that they have right now, which is not exactly an exciting roster. And all the people in the press box and all that the questions are going to be about what direction is going to happen during the offseason, and they can't answer Stamkos questions, but there's not going to be much in terms of game action that the media is really going to be interested in.
Well, I think that's part. Well, I was going to say that's part of the fun, though. I mean, with a losing season, once the deadline's gone, there's no storylines left. I mean, there's no storylines until it's lottery time. Right. And at least this year, the lottery is going to be a little bit more exciting. I mean, last year it was exciting just because you were gunning for number one, and it was all about McDavid, and finishing last, it was McDavid, Eichel, and then everybody else. It didn't really much matter, even though it was a great draft. But this year, so much more drama. You're drafting the top, your lottery picks you're doing the lottery for the top 3 picks, and you can end up getting, maybe you get Austin Matthews first, or maybe some team comes from way back in the pack and they get second or third, and suddenly a team who just missed the playoffs is getting one of the great Finnish kids, or Matthew Tkachuk or somebody. Then it's a different type of drama. But for Toronto, I mean, they had a part in this last year. They had they weren't very good last season either, so they were in this last year. It's just so much different now with Babcock and they set it up this year so that they can be big sellers at the deadline. And Toronto's always going to be in the news no matter what. And it just so happens that this time around they're going to be way more in the news.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but Mike, they could ignore the written news and they could ignore the radio stuff and the TV stuff. The only time it's going to directly affect them is when they're in Toronto, and if the Leaf people, if the Toronto stations let somebody follow around the Tampa Bay Lightning for the last month and a half of the season, which they're probably not going to allocate. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a distraction, to be honest, because they've been dealing with it all year.
Yeah, that's true. And finally, we'll talk something Leaf related later in the show, but I know that right now saying how many scouts are at a game is really meaningless. I realize that, but I say this with all respect. Lou Lamoriello and the Leafs organization is a completely closed shop now as compared to the way they were in the last few years. You can't get a rumor out of Lou Lamoriello. I mean, the TSN insiders last night when they were talking about, Roman Polak as one of the top 10 guys going someplace, did not have a potential destination. They didn't know, they didn't say it could be this place or it could be that place. They did not know. So if Mackenzie, Drager, and LeBrun don't know, then nobody's going to know. But that's why I think how many scouts were at the Boston-Toronto game last night is the only indication we're going to get of where guys like Roman Polak or things that Lamoriello is going to do. And they had 12 teams represented at the TD Garden last night. So I don't know if that means anything, but I think that's about as much as you're going to get in the next 26 days. So, all right, let's start.
But here's the thought.
Go ahead.
How about TSN works on some of the other teams instead of just Toronto?
Yeah, but and this may be an urban legend, but from what I have heard, if another team who
I don't mean trying to backdoor Leafs information.
Oh, okay.
I mean just work the rest of the league, and then if you happen to find out something about the Leafs, so be it.
Yeah, and maybe that's possible, but it was just
maybe that's possible.
Well
now you know what's funny? You've just described the problem, like with my own radio station, with Sirius XM and NHL Network Radio, where sometimes people will think it's too Toronto-centric, and your answer just proved that.
Okay, well, I'm sorry.
All right.
That's what I'm focused on, Russ. What can I tell you? All right, let's start the show here. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 2016.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology. Buy my book. Come to my book signing in Glassboro, New Jersey this Saturday, 3 to 5. Thank you.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com, and we are pleased to be joined today by Joe Yerdon, who is a correspondent from NHL.com, a Buffalo guy, so we have Russ outnumbered.
Well, we're all New York guys.
Yeah, well, that's true. Okay, that's true. So we have a New York quota. Joe, you were at the AHL All-Star game. I don't know if you went to the skills competition on Sunday or if you just went for the game on Monday. But if you did go to the skills competition, I wanted to see any thoughts from that. But more, how was the 3-on-3 at that game in Syracuse? And were there any players that really jumped out at you as being close to being on the cusp of the NHL?
Well, I was there for the full weekend. I was there for the skills and for the game, so it was a great weekend. AHL puts on a great event, and the format for their game this year was a little different. I mean, they did a round robin tournament with the 4 divisions, and they played 9-minute games. And the first half of the game was 4-on-4, and the second half of the game was 3-on-3. So you got a taste of what it was like last year for overtime in the AHL, because they did the split with 4-on-4 than 3-on-3. But the championship game was 6 minutes of 3-on-3, which they broke it up into 2 halves. So you play 3 minutes, take a quick break, play another 3 minutes, just so they don't end up killing everybody. After having already played 3 games beforehand. So
right.
I thought it was great. I think it proved that playing 3-on-3 is way more exciting. because the first few games, the 4-on-4 aspect, it was basically a skate around for 4.5 minutes until it became 3-on-3, and then the offense opened up. So I think I think if anything, it showed that 3-on-3 is the way to go. But there's probably going to be some tweaks to that format next year. Maybe they try to do it a little bit more similar to the NHL, where it's 2 games, 2 semifinals, the winners play in the finals, and you go from there. But I thought it was great, and for the players, they trying to pick out who stands out in an all-star games, it's a little tricky.
Yeah.
And because these guys are they're half taking it serious, half not taking it serious, so it's you don't really get a good feel on it. But the guys that stood out were the veteran guys, guys like Pat Cannone, guys like Michael Layton, who we've seen these guys before in the NHL. And for the younger guys, I thought Nick Ritchie with San Diego, I thought he looked pretty good. Brandon Montour, another guy in San Diego who's going to be eventually Anaheim's going to end up trading a defenseman, and Montour's going to be the next guy.
Oh, yeah.
Next guy up with Shea Theodore. But I look at those guys; they were really good. Mike McCarron with St. John's, another strong player. But these are guys where it's going to be you got to see him in real life to really get a handle on. The other guy was somebody Mike, is Josh Lavo, who was just outstanding for his division. He was the only guy who was really scoring goals.
Yeah, I know that Levo played 4 games with the Leafs, got called up. It was when somebody got hurt, but they called him up, didn't score anything, but then got sent down to the Marlies and scored 2 goals and 2 assists in the last game before the All-Star break. He's one of these guys that after the deadline, I think, is going to get a long look in Toronto, along with guys like Matt Fratton and some of the more veteran AHLers. I think they're going to keep the Nylanders and guys like T.J. Brennan, who I don't think they want to expose to potential of being claimed on waivers with the Marlies doing so well. But they're going to give this guys like Sam Carrick and a lot of the more experienced AHL guys a look at the NHL rather than call up the young guys. But so Levo is going to get a chance. But I know that Nylander only played 1 game before after coming back from the concussion and the appendicitis that he had before going to the All-Star game. I heard he didn't really look that great, but it's understandable if he didn't.
You know what, Nylander, he was playing a lot with Levo, so I mean that helps out. Those 2 guys were trying to work their magic together because a game like that where if, especially in the 4-on-4 setup, I think you want teammates to work together. You saw a lot of the guys from Rockford paired up together. Ryan Hartman working with his guys, and you want to keep that chemistry going. It's the easiest way to coach that is just to keep guys familiar with each other together. And listen, coming back from a concussion and coming back from getting your appendix taken out, it's going to take a while. Especially if it knocked out Nylander for as long as it did for appendicitis. I mean, it's brutal. It's brutal if things go wrong, and I have no idea if anything went wrong with that, but things go wrong there, it can be very annoying and it can just slow you down. So, All-Star break probably could have helped him out if he stayed at home, but more fun for him to be there, be one of the faces of the league. I mean, Toronto's just crushing everybody in the AHL, so you want those guys to be there.
Yeah, and I think that the Leafs organization is probably going to try to do their best not to disrupt that team the way they're playing right now. I think they know, like Binghamton a few years ago, and then a lot of players ended up playing in Ottawa, like Norfolk, and a lot of those players are John Cooper's favorites in Tampa, like Grand Rapids, what they wanted in Detroit. If you have AHL success and you have a lot of young players, that translates to success in the NHL. So I think that's a formula that Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs organization wants to follow.
The one guy that Joe mentioned, I like all those guys he mentioned, except Mike McCarron. I'm not a huge Mike McCarron fan, and I think he's gotten a little better over time. But I think if he was really better, he'd be up helping the team. Unfortunately, because that team just needs so much help. You'd have to believe here's the indictment on him. Lucas Lessio got called up ahead of him.
Yeah, but he was called up, Russ. They've been doing the rotation. They called up Daniel Carr and Charles Houdon, and and McCarron for a few
presence like McCarron to stick if he really could stick. That's basically what I'm saying.
But it might be the fact that Michel Therrien doesn't want to play young guys, especially when his job is potentially on the line. And
Possible.
so I mean, I don't know how many minutes these guys got, but I'm assuming they're playing fourth line and they're not having much of an impact. That's why they're
Yeah, I mean that's what Lesio was. That's the way they worked out for him before he got injured.
right. All right, let's move on to some things that happened in the NHL last night, and most notably the return of Connor McDavid in Edmonton against the Columbus Blue Jackets. So it was perfectly set up, Russ, for him to succeed since the Blue Jackets have been so terrible this year. And is it a big thing to walk around Jack Johnson? I don't know, but McDavid did a prototypical Gilbert Perreault type of goal last night. Took the puck at the blue line, went through one forward and both Columbus defensemen, and then walked around Korpisalo for, I think, one of the better goals of the year. The question I have, Russ, is I know that Edmonton is 8 points out of third place in the Pacific. I think it's a little even more further behind the wild card. With McDavid back, do they even get close to climbing back into the race?
No, I mean they'll gain some points in the standings because he will win some games, but you see that goal, and it's a fantastic goal. It's a goal of skill and finesse and everything else, but it's also a goal that maybe John Tortorella should have the whole defense apologize to the team the way he had Scott Hartnell, because the way they sort of were just like sheepishly standing around and trying to get the puck. They didn't really do much to sort of try and disconnect Connor McDavid from that puck, and it just shows how bad the Columbus Blue Jackets defense really is.
Joe, now I know that right now, if you ask most NHL writers, that 1-2 would be Panarin and Dylan Larkin for the Calder. I mean, it's one game, but McDavid is a phenomenal talent. He was almost at a point per game pace before he got injured. Does he have to maintain a point per game pace or even exceed that to get back in the mix for the Calder?
I would think so. I mean, it's going to be very tough to catch Panarin, and there's going to be the next storyline I think you got to wait on is the one where everybody's yelling about Panarin being 24. We started hearing those grumbles already with Larkin, and now the way Eichel's played since the Christmas break,
right.
People in Buffalo are starting to get snarky about the 24, Panarin being 24 and having played pro for 7 years now. But I think if McDavid makes a big enough push and he gets, this could be a very Mark Stone like run here in the second half for McDavid, where if the Oilers go on a run here and they win a bunch of games and maybe start sniffing around that playoff spot again, and McDavid's the reason for it, people are going to start really pushing for it. Let's face it, he was the number one pick. Everybody talked about him for 2 years before the draft, and they've been talking about him all year. If he does that, he's probably going to win the Calder regardless of what Panarin and Larkin and Eichel do. And it's going to make that game March 1st in Buffalo all the more fascinating, provided Eichel and McDavid are playing in it. But all the attention is going to be on those two guys, and it's going to set up to be like that post-trade deadline sort of Super Bowl kind of game, because you don't know who's going to be left on either team's roster, but you do know Eichel and McDavid are going to be there.
Yeah, that March 1st game probably should have been the opening game for the season on television and everything else, as we all know. But I still think Larkin does have the edge. I don't care that much about the Panarin age, but I get where the fans are coming from. I mean, Sergei Makarov was 27, 24. At this day and age, maybe you do need to change the rules again, because 24 is getting to be a little bit old for that. But I still think a dark horse in this, too, could be John Gibson. If John Gibson somehow leads Anaheim into the playoffs, I got to tell you, he might be on that list, because he's having a phenomenal year, and he is still classified a rookie as well, even though a lot of people don't look at him that way.
Yeah, I also think that a negative for Panarin is the fact that he's playing with Patrick Kane. In a way, it's like not that Panarin is a creation of Patrick Kane's abilities, but it does help to have a premier player playing on your line. I mean, you can say the same thing for Larkin, because I know his line mates have changed. He's played with Zetterberg, he's played with other good players, but the fact that Kane is having such a great season and is leading the NHL by a sizable margin right now, I think in a way could take away from Panarin's case for the Calder. Now, Joe, you've watched Eichel most of the year. I've watched him more than normal because I'll watch the occasional Sabres game. He had a lull, I would say, early mid-December and seemed to catch his second wind. And now the last few games before the All-Star break has really impressed me. I mean, does that correspond with what you saw?
Yeah, I mean he's had 20 points in the last 18 games before the All-Star break, and he's even on games where he seems to maybe be kind of off, he's been able to get points. He's been able to set guys up and get assists. But to me, he's been more of he's looked a lot more like the guy that I think everybody thought he was going to be, from the get-go right out of BU. I think for him it's been a process for him where, once he reached that, he plays those first 30 games in the schedule where, the NHL schedule is a lot tighter than the college schedule. And, college, you're spreading 40 games out over, a span of a few months, whereas here, 30 games happens in the first, 2.5, 3 months. So I think for him, it's, adjusting to that and then figuring out his fitness levels. But I think now the second half of the season, I think he's going to be a lot more of what we've seen the last 18 games going ahead, because some people have been trying to spin his success by saying, like, you put these veterans on his line and that's helping him out. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case. I think he's helping these veterans out. I think he's helping these guys.
I was going to say, Joe, is it fair to say that if he had better players on his lines, he'd have more points? Because I think he's tried to get a lot more points that haven't gone in because of some of those guys on his lines.
Well, he's lost some points based on some of the offside challenges and things like that. I mean, it's a handful of points, but it's things like that, and the other guys on the roster who have just been snake bitten this year. I mean, Vander Kane's taken a ton of shots this year, and he's shooting maybe 7%, and I mean it's an average level, but for a guy that's supposed to score 20, 30, even 40 goals.
50. Come on, Joe. He's supposed to score 50.
Hey, he wanted 50. He wanted 50 bad, but
I won $1 million too, but
don't
well, he had it in his hands in Vegas.
But I mean, it's for a guy like that, who's not putting the puck in, and then not to mention Matt Molson hasn't scored since November 1st. Tyler Ennis has had an unbelievably bad season. I mean, these are guys that they expected to score a lot, and they haven't. So, there's more points out there to be had, and the Sabres offense is going to rebound. There's no way it can't. But when it does, Eichel's going to be the guy in the mix. O'Reilly's been there too, but Eichel's going to be the guy where I think the points are going to come from even more.
Yeah, I get the feeling that the Sabres are going to have a strong second half because, Eichel will only improve. I like what I've seen in bits from Sam Reinhart. I would think that a player of the talent of Vander Kane will eventually find the net.
My thoughts on that one.
I know, Russ.
I think people have overshot on what they think Evander Kane will do and what he actually does.
And they did get Robin Leonard back, and in a few games that I've seen, he has played pretty well. So if they get consistent goaltending, which they didn't get out of Olmark and Chad Johnson in the first half, they could. I mean, I don't think they're going to climb back in the playoff race, but I think they're going to be significantly better. So I don't think they're going to finish in 29th spot as much as Tim Murray would like them to. Okay.
I don't know that he would like them to be honest. I mean, it's a nice reward, but I don't think he wants that.
No. Probably not, but if they get Austin Matthews out of it, I think he would like the fringe benefit, but we'll see. Now, Dennis Weidman had his hearing in Toronto yesterday, along with the bulk of the Calgary Flames management team. Burke and Brad Treliving were there. A decision hasn't come down yet, but it's supposed to come down sometime today. It's weird, Russ, because I saw the replay originally from the back as Weidman was going to the bench, and it didn't look as bad. And then I saw a replay of the opposite direction where he was coming at the referee, and it looked like he thought he was making contact with a player and did not really let up. I'm getting to think now it's going to be a 10+ game suspension for him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 10 because he did the act. But I told you, I just don't think he was in his right mind. And after speaking with that concussion specialist, I really don't think he was in his right mind. And I think he thought he was hitting a player because he really was not right because he got dinged up before that, and after getting mad at the ref, was probably pretty woozy going to the bench. And so I think at the end of the day, did he know it was a ref? No, I don't think he knew it was a ref. Did he do the act? He did the act. Does he deserve 21? Probably not, because there's no clause in there. That's the problem with this rule is there's no real fine line. There's no gray area, and it's like 21 games or nothing. But now I think they're going to create a gray area, and I think he'll get 10.
Joe, what do you think?
It's reading up about this from Elliot Friedman and trying to read the tea leaves on this thing. Knowing how strong the officiating union is when it comes to these matters, they're not going to allow this to be a slap on the wrist. But I think you're right. I think there needs to be a gray area here because you watch the one video from behind and it looks like an absolutely heinous act, but when you see the other angle, it looks very accidental. So it's really up on how the explanation is made by Weidman in the hearing and how this goes down. But I can't see him being let off because the officials will go absolutely bananas about that. And I don't think anybody wants to see a league where the officials may passive aggressively respond on the ice, and I don't think anybody wants that. So I think you guys are right. I think it's gonna fall somewhere in that 10-game area, but I can't see them throwing the book at them.
And it's going to be
the thing is, Mike, it went 90 minutes. Normally these meetings go between 5 and 15 minutes. This went 90 minutes, and we still don't have a decision. So Joe's right. Obviously, there's a lot more in the works than just what we see.
And it could end up being a battle between two unions, where you have the officials union and then the PA, because if they go too much, if they go 20, the PA is going to go mad. I don't think
they can. I think that's the one area where I don't think the PA can, because if the league wants to and they go 21, that's the way it's written.
So what is it? 3, 10, or 21?
Right. So that's the way it's written. So I don't think they would win that argument, but I think they're sort of waiting just to see what the outcome is. And I think at this point, I don't think they're going to fight anything. I really don't think the PA can fight it.
Well, I think if it goes 10, I think everybody. I'm not saying Weidman or the Flames will be happy. I'm not saying that if everybody is a little bit unhappy, then everybody will accept it. If it goes too much or too little, then I think there's going to be a little bit of a crap storm here. So, but we'll see. It should come down sometime today. Now, Russ, you were at the game in Philadelphia last night where the Habs played the Flyers. Flyers win. Habs continue to fall like a stone, which I know that members of Leaf Nation are very happy about that. But now the thing is, they're 5 points now behind the last wild card spot. It's getting to the point now where they may be out of it already.
Yeah, they're quickly turning into a lottery team, and they can't wait on Carey Price anymore. Again, I go back. It's kind of weird. I've never been at a Winter Classic where I was covering it, and then I felt compelled to cover a win for the Canadians and point out that they're in deep trouble even after the win because their coach was making tons of excuses leading up to that game. Mm-hmm. And since the vote of confidence, he's 1-3 now. He's a big part of this. He's not all of it. I mean, there were guys standing around after the Flyers had their 5-minute power play, after the Gudas hit. We'll talk about that in a little bit. After all that, when the empty netter was scored, guys were just accepted it. It was bad. Their feet stopped moving. Once the Flyers made one pass, they were like, all right, I guess this game's over. And it was bad. I mean, Subban did his best in the locker room, too. He really, I posted a soundbite on Audio Boom. He tried to rally the troops. He's like, look, we can't try and win 2-1, 3-2 games, 1-0 or 2-1 games anymore. We need to score at least 3 goals. But the problem is that's the system that Michel Therrien has set up there. And they haven't been able to make a big trade for someone who could break through as a scorer. So clearly, to me, the way they run the team has to change because I think they have a lot of guys that still can score. But even in that game, Subban's passing more than he's shooting. He needs to be a shooting machine, and I think that has completely changed in the last 2 years under Therrien.
That's the system that that Therrien has implemented because Price is not there and they can't score. they haven't scored since Price got hurt, and in the absence of Price, you have to do what Bruce Boudreau did in Anaheim. He basically played a strapped down defensive style and got Anaheim back on on a winning track, and now they're in the playoffs right now. And they're still not doing as good as they should have been doing, but at least they're on a positive track. In Montreal, they just can't pull out of this death spiral. Now, Joe. Montreal was in Toronto a couple weeks ago, Saturday night game. Montreal gets up 2-0, I think it was in the first period or early second, and they went into a defensive shell in the early second period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that team is so fragile. Their psyche is so fragile right now. This is reminiscent of what happened to the Leafs last year. The second half was loss after loss after loss.
Desperation is a stinky cologne, and the Canadiens, when they get in a situation like that, they're swimming in it. And watching how it goes, and it's not the same thing as what happened with Therrien in Pittsburgh in 08-09. It's not like that at all. It's different, but it's eerily similar. Like Montreal's a team that has guys that can score. They have guys that can put the puck in the net, and it seems like they're being deployed in all the wrong ways all the time, and I think that's what's driving the fans crazy, is that they see, it's like the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing every day and expecting different results, it's not going to happen. And I think in this case, you see, guys like David Desharnais getting tons of minutes, and Alex Galchenyuk being played on the wing and not getting a ton of time. It's things like that where guys that that they can produce if they're put in the right situations aren't being used. I'd just be bashing my head against the wall if I was a Habs fan. I'm losing my mind over this. And, it's a situation where, things are so bad right now that, when they play, they're playing Buffalo tonight. And if the Sabres jump out and get a goal early, it's going to be meltdown city with the fans, because they're going to be booing their own guys, carrying the puck up and down the ice the entire game. It's gotten to that point where something has to give, and Marc Bergevin's got to, whatever the trick is, he's got to pull the trigger. I don't think trading top guys is the way to do it. I think, I'm never going to advocate for a guy to lose his job, but geez, you can't keep thinking that Terrian's got a handle on this thing.
Russ, it's funny because 3 weeks ago, most people were saying they got to trade for Eric Stahl, they got to add scoring, they got to do this, and now in the last week after the All-Star break, it's basically, can they trade Andrei Markov? Can they trade Alexei Emelin? Does anybody want Thomas Plekanec?
You see, I think that's the wrong way for them to go. It's like, here's the funny thing. When they were on the power play yesterday, they were fine, right? Their power play still is good, and that's the one part of their team that works well. And when they're on the power play, their defensemen all of a sudden become offensive, and then they score goals like Markov did yesterday. And Below missed one in that game where he had pretty much an empty netter and was kicking himself after the game. And you could see he was just killing himself in the locker room. They were basically him and Subban and Condon were the only guys around, though. Everybody else scattered. They did, and they just don't want to even talk to the media. But the thing is, they have a lot of offensively gifted defensemen. Even Petrie was in on that first goal. Why aren't they utilizing that more? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they've set up this defensive system that sucks a lot of the offensive life out of them. They've got to turn it completely around and go the other way, because they still have guys that can affect the game on the score sheet. And if you give up 3 goals, then score 4. There's a way to do it. And they don't always have to make a trade. They'll get somebody at the deadline, but that may be too late. I think this team is a week's worth of losses away from just being buried.
Well, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, we have 3.5 weeks till the deadline, and if they continue to fall like this, I think you might see, if there are teams interested in a veteran defenseman like an Emelin or a Markov, there might be a deal there. But then if they do that, then why did they give up on Jared Tenorti? Because there's a young defenseman, unless they decided that he wasn't going to be what they were looking for.
I think that's what they decided.
Yeah.
They also decided once upon a time that Ryan McDonough wasn't good for them either. But besides that, here's the thing. So let's talk about the Gudas hit for a minute.
Sure.
Because, and I don't know if you guys got a chance to see it. There may not be video, but basically he went out of his way and he low-bridged and got a knee hit in there, and I forget who was on it. It was on Lucas Lessio.
Yeah.
And he low-bridged him, and And the interesting thing was, I have a guy who refs games that was sitting next to me, and there was no initial arm that went up. And then they went and talked about it, and I guess initially they were just talking about a regular penalty, and then they switched it to a 5-minute in a game. And after the game, Claude Giroux was like, he's never seen that before, where they literally switched it and said, well, now it's going to be 5. And you got to be careful with that. The referees really have to be careful with this, because there's enough guys on the ice to make the right call at the right time. It was an obvious call. Like, unless they were out of position, it was obvious. And maybe Toronto whispered it in their ear. I don't know. But the point was, I understood, even though they got the win, Giroux's frustration after the game. And look, a guy like Gudas, who's been suspended before,
right,
I would have to think the league's going to look at this. But I don't know if you guys, like I said, had a chance to see it or not.
I didn't see it, but to me, just from what you just said, it sounds like a reputation call. It sounds like, I mean, Gudas has a reputation of being somebody who undercuts players. He's always done that back to Tampa. So maybe they got together and that's when they decided that. But yeah, I mean, if the initial call wasn't made, I'm a little skeptical that they would all of a sudden go from nothing to a 5-minute major.
I think they went from nothing to quickly to something else, which they obviously told Giroux, to then something else.
Well, I did get a chance to see it because, you know, people always go nuts whenever Gudas does anything. Honestly,
Right.
I mean, it's been this way for a bit. But I mean, it's a pretty bad play. I mean, he sticks his leg out. You know, it's a direct knee-on-knee hit. It's bad. I mean, it's a bad play, and it's the kind of thing we've seen out of him in the past. I mean, there's any guy in the league right now that's a throwback to maybe, you know, some of the uglier parts of the old days.
Brian Martzman.
Yeah, it's a very mush-like play. I mean, it's that kind of thing. But you know, Mike, you say it's kind of a reputation thing, but I just wonder if maybe one of the linesmen came in and said, "Hey, listen, I saw this." Because I think the only guy that could really see that kind of play is a linesman who's up, you know, watching the play up along the boards there. But you know, those are the kind of situations I would rather see the guys huddle together and talk it over and figure it out from there, instead of just, you know, both referees look at each other. You see it? You see it? Nope. Okay. Well, whatever. But with Gudas, I think I read earlier today he's not going to get suspended. I think the major in the game was enough.
Wow.
For their needs. So I mean, that was as of this morning. That might change now.
I'm surprised.
But you know what? If there's a guy who's been able to get away with stuff like that, it's also him. So I mean, hey, you know, maybe it's just one of these things where one hand shakes the other, and everything sorts itself out. But it's a bad play. It's a bad play. It's a bad hit. You can't have that kind of stuff.
Okay, in the news, after the loss to the Dallas Stars last night, Dustin Byfuglien made comments to the media regarding his status and his interest in staying in Winnipeg. He said, I quote, "Yeah, I would love to stay in Winnipeg. I met a lot of good people and have some really good friends here. I've been here a long time. You never want to leave home. I've been here long enough. Family's been here, and I've had 2 kids here. It's somewhere I do not want to leave." Now, to me, Russ, that puts the pressure back on Cheveldayoff and the Jets, because now he's indicated, I want to stay. So now it's okay, ownership, okay, Cheveldayoff, put up the money or shut up.
See, my thing is, I'm pretty sure they've had some sort of discussions, and if Dustin felt like that strongly that he needed to stay, why didn't he sign? That's my easy question back to them. Cheveldayoff will never say that, but that's what I would say is like, well, then why didn't you sign if you want to stay here so badly? Because obviously he's looking for a lot of money too.
Yeah.
And it's always, look, at the end of the day, it's always nice when someone says, hey, I want to stay and I love it here, but it always ends up to be about the money. And so they may not have the money for him. Now, they say they're not going to re-sign Ladd either, but maybe they weren't going to re-sign Ladd when they thought they were going to re-sign Byfuglien, and if they don't think they can re-sign Byfuglien, maybe then the Ladd goes back on the table. This is what will happen for the next couple of weeks until they make a decision. But they could actually lose them both. I mean, that's, it's sort of heading that way. And then I don't know how Jets fans would take that. They certainly have guys that could come up. We've talked about it. Morrissey. They've got Nick Patan. They've got guys that could come up.
Sure. But
you still have to have guys that have a winning attitude and have won before, and also are big time players. And we'll see. We'll see how it works out. I still have this feeling that they're going to lose both. Like I thought they would re-sign Ladd, and I was really shocked to see when that broke down. And so when that broke down, my feeling was they're losing both.
Now the report is that they've offered Ladd, I think it was a 6-year deal at around $6 million. He's looking for closer to $7 million. He's looking for the equivalent of the Ryan Kessler deal, and I think that's insane for them. So I don't blame them if that's what he's asking for him to walk away. But Joe, Byfuglien is a different story. Now he is over 30 years old, and they could get I think they could get a really good return in terms of a package for him. But you're not going to get a defenseman like that unless Jacob Trouba turns into Byfuglien or into something like Byfuglien. You're not going to get a defenseman like that in Winnipeg ever again.
No, I think with Byfuglien, they have to realize that between him and Ladd, and I mean they're both great players, but Bufflin's the guy he's kind of the straw that serves the drink. Honestly, I mean he's the guy that makes it go on the back end for them. And he's such a good offensive defenseman, but also such a physical presence. And, I'm sure one of the worries Winnipeg has is what happens when the wheels go. Like once he starts to slow down, you're looking at a 6'6" guy who's plays way above 250 pounds, suddenly trying to haul up and down the ice. And if he loses that, that speed goes away, which it's going to at some point. I mean, it's just natural. But when, if you hand him a 6 or 7 year contract, you're looking at maybe, you don't know how many years you're going to have where suddenly he's a big liability. And then you got to start thinking, well, maybe we got to move him to forward again where he's not as valuable. So it's a tough spot to be in. But, for a guy of his caliber, you got to pay him. And I think that's the rock and the hard place that they are with this, because I don't think they want to give Ladd $7 million a year. I think even $6 million a year is pushing it a bit. But
it is.
But when you've got this kind of situation, and these are the two guys that are driving everything, you got to pick one. And I think in this case, Byfuglien's the right guy to side with. You can trade Ladd and get a great return on him. That's perfect, because there's cup contenders that could use a guy like Ladd who's already won it twice.
Now, Bob McKenzie just reports 20 games for Dennis Wideman.
Yeah,
well, let's see.
They left They left one game on the table there.
Yeah, well, they threw the book at him. Now that may complicate what Eck reported yesterday of a possible deal involving Wideman, because 20 games, I think, takes him probably into mid to late March. Yep. So that's, for a team, if it's a team like Boston who's fighting for a playoff spot, they're not going to trade for somebody who's making over $5 million who they won't have access to for almost a month after the trade deadline. So
that'd be like Boston trading for a guy like Thomas Caberlet, right? They wouldn't do that.
Wow.
Well, you know what this probably does, though, is that this probably means Chris Russell isn't going to go anywhere, because now there was rumors he was on the move potentially, and now you can't get rid of him. If Calgary's going to be in the playoff race here, can't get rid of Russell when you're not going to have Wideman around. It's a tough blow. You're asking Giordano and Brody to do all the heavy lifting instead of just some of it. You're asking them to do all of it and play 30 minutes a night.
Well, and Hamilton plays a lot too. I mean,
yeah. The final thing about Byfuglien, though, I mean, I heard Darren Drager from TSN yesterday saying that I think Winnipeg at most wants to go 5 years on him, and
that's what I would give him too. I wouldn't go more than 5.
Yeah, but for 5 years, he's probably going to want $7.5 to $8 million, and
I'd give him 8. I would give him 8 for 5 years. I would.
You would? Maybe I would. I don't know if the ownership of the Jets would. And the thing that complicates it is, Russ, and we both know this, they probably want to sign Scheifele to a long-term deal. Like
Trouba has to get signed at some point.
Trouba's got to, if they're going to sign Trouba, they're going to try to get Trouba locked up for 6-7 years. They're going to try to buy unrestricted years. They're probably going to want to do the same thing for Scheifele as well. So if they're making investments of $5.5, $6.5 million on those two players, then you're talking about stretching the budget even more to sign Byfuglien. Then you might have to move out an Enstrom or a Brian Little to make the budget work.
Yeah, they'll lose Pavlik's salary, though. They'll lose some other salaries. I think it's doable. I think at the end of the day, they do need to pay a premium for Byfuglien, and I would play the premium on the annual and take off the years. And I think, I think if he got 5 years, if they offered him 5 years, 8 per, I think he would take that. I don't know why I think he would take that, but I do think he would, because I feel like then he would feel like he has the respect. And at 35, you could make the argument he could still get another contract if he keeps himself in shape. And I think if he kept himself in better shape, he would get the 7 years.
Dennis Weidman will forfeit $564,000 in salary for a 20-game suspension.
Yep.
Okay, a couple other items. In the 3-2, I think it was 3-2 loss by the Rangers to the New Jersey Devils last night. It was a 3-2
loss. I can confirm that.
Yes, thank you. Kevin Klein, defenseman for the Rangers, fractured his thumb. I believe they said the expected time he would be out would be 6 to 8 weeks. That's normal for a fractured thumb. Rust, does that affect the potential of them trading Keith Yandle before the deadline?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it severely affects them. I think before this, they could have gotten probably a top 6 forward or something like that for Yandle, but now, you're putting McElrath in there, who's been okay, and you're going to give him more of a role than he had. You're going to be expecting Dan Boyle, who's literally on his last legs, to have a bigger role. I mean, again, there's so many things going on with that team, and they just figured out to use Yandle on the top power play. They should have been there all year. At the end of the day, they don't want the Garden to go dark. The Knicks may make the playoffs. They may not. And I always bring up basketball when it comes to the Knicks, too, because Dolan owns both. And at the end of the day, a lot of decisions that get made for the Rangers get made because the Garden needs to make money, right? That place needs to keep churning out dollars. And so they're going to do everything they can to make the playoffs. And Jeff Gordon's in a real tough spot here because I don't think he could trade Yandle now unless he, again, this would be on the coach. The coach has made a lot of mistakes this year, too, as far as playing young players, benching guys like Lindbergh, not working in Brady Shea. If they could work in Brady Shea before the end of the year, then they might be able to trade Yandle. But the only way to find that out is to actually bring him up and play him 5 to 7 games. You have to be willing to risk that. And at this point, I think the Rangers have to be willing to risk that and let the potential season go down the tubes just to see where they end up, because they've got to know on trading deadline day what to do with Yandle. And if it's close, if they're within 6 points, they're going to have to keep him.
Joe, it looks to me like the window has closed on the Rangers because I don't see. I mean, they may put Klein on long-term injury to open up some cap space, but he'll be back before the end of the year.
But he's cheap too.
What's that?
He's cheap. He's not that much money.
Right. He's I think he's under $3 million or close to that. So he's not. It's not a big. The only way that they can open up cap space is moving Tanner Glass or there's nobody's going to take Dan Boyle. Dan Boyle is not going to waive his no move clause. They're not going to trade Rick Nash. Those they can't. They can, and I don't know if anybody would really be interested at almost $8 million. But I see no way of them opening up enough space to add players unless they find a team out there who would take a salary off of their hands. And I don't see a pathway for the Rangers making improvements before the deadline, Joe.
It's crazy to me that they were even thinking about trading Keith Yandle because he was the guy who was really making things work. And it doesn't always show up obviously in the stats, but he's the guy who's he's your puck mover. He's your guy doing all that. I mean, it's him and McDonough. Those are the two. And, you cut out Yandle, and then suddenly McDonough's got to do everything, especially with Dan Girardi playing bad, especially with, you mentioned Dan Boyle just, not being what he used to be. It's a mess of a situation there. And, plugging McElrath in there, it's going to make some of the fans happy that he's going to be playing. And, I know with some of those guys, it's tough. It's been a tough season. It's been a tough couple of seasons for some of them, but I think you might be onto something here. This is, the Rangers are coming up against it, and this has been a few years where their window to win it has been there, and it's trying to make it all fall on Henrik's shoulders to keep this team alive and keep it going. It's gonna fail them at some point. I mean, he's been doing it for the better part of 7, 8 years now,
right? Trying
to do his thing, and now we're getting to that point where maybe it's up to some of these other forwards, some of these defensemen to step up and help the King out and help get things squared away. And that means Nash has got to do his thing. It means Kreider's got to do his thing. These guys have got to play better. Everybody has to play better. And you lose Kevin Klein for a bit, and it just shows how thin that depth was on defense.
Yeah, I'll tell you two more points. Hayes and Kreider have gotten worse as far as hockey IQ has gone this season. And, again, I have to blame coaching on that. I mean, last year they were fine. They knew what to do, when to do it. This year they don't even seem to be on the same page. Everybody saw that one shot of Kreider about a week ago where he was like 20 feet off sides. Like, I mean, that made its rounds on Twitter. Those things are emblematic of the coaching, and I think Alain Vigneault has been like Teflon right now, but I think at some point he's going to have to start working this too, because the part of the Rangers that's broken is people say, oh, well, they don't draft well enough. No, they do draft well enough, but in the past they've traded too many picks. So Gordie Clark's had to pick from the second, third round to start off his drafts. But even past that, player development has sort of failed them because they have some guys that are close. They also have a guy, Pavel Buchnevich, who was looking for a roster spot, and had he been guaranteed one, would have stayed and started the season. But at the start of the season, I don't think the Rangers gave him any indication, or Vigneault either, that there was a spot for him on the team, so he went back and played in Russia, and he's their best offensive prospect.
Well, and this can't be answered now. It will be answered after the season in the summer. But it's going to be very interesting to see what Gorton does to sort of, I don't know if it's take a step back or
a reboot. They need a reboot.
Yeah, because first of all, I don't think Kreider has made a good case for earning that Derek Stepan type of contract extension. He, if he had put up big numbers, I think he could have made a pretty good case. But now it's either another bridge deal or if he presses for a bigger deal, he might get traded. But Nash at 7'8", declining numbers. I don't know if anybody can. First of all, I don't know if anybody would want to take him at that amount. They'd probably have to retain some salary to move him. But to me, that's the move you would have to make if you're going to reboot and try to go in a different direction. Is to move Nash and maybe get something back and go that way.
Or try and get Dan Girardi to move his very limited team outlook trade contract. I don't know if it's a no movement, a no trade. He's got one that basically he's got the hammer. So could you get him to do that? Probably not. And even Mark Stahl at this point, while he's been good, he's still not the same Mark Stahl. Could you get him to do that? I don't know. But these are all Glenn Sader contracts that are sort of built up against Jeff Gorton that he now has to navigate through. It's not going to be easy.
Finally, found this pretty interesting, and we talked. I know that Russ, you mentioned Mark Jankowski yesterday, Calgary first-round pick, who is a senior at Providence, who more than likely there's been some indications that he's not going to sign with the Flames because they have, they're strung up the middle with Bennett and Monahan, and he can become an unrestricted free agent based on what the CBA says. If he doesn't sign with the team that drafted him, I think it's August 15th is the deadline. So if he indicates to Calgary he's not going to sign with them, then they can trade him up to August 15th, trade his rights, or he can just sign anywhere.
Yep.
Same case can be made for Harvard's Jimmy Vesey. He was a third-round pick of the Nashville Predators. He was in the mix for the Hobey Baker last year. He's in the mix for the Hobey Baker this year. He's expected to be a pretty good pro, and David Poile, the Nashville GM, is licking his chops to get him. And this was the quote. Now, previous to this year, they had indicated that if he signed, they would want him to go to Milwaukee for a little bit and test things out, and then they would call him up. Now, all of a sudden, because I think they know that the rumors that are out there, this is Poile's quote: "We have no idea how long his season at Harvard is going to go exactly, and we have to sign him, but we've told him all along, as recently as last week, that we have a spot for him." Gee, Dave, how magnanimous of you. Now, Joe, I know these free agents, they're drafted, but they have the possibility of being unrestricted free agents. I know guys like Mike Riley and Justin Schultz. I don't see any of these guys, even if the team that drafted them say you have an opportunity to play, them passing up the opportunity to choose exactly where they want to go.
Well, I think in this case, it's Poile saying that it's like the last-ditch effort to try to say, listen, we're possibly a playoff team. We could probably really use you once Harvard season's over. You can immediately cut that first year of your ELC off once you show up in Nashville at the end of the year. I think these are all negotiating ploys through the media, honestly, because VC's a guy who's he could have signed with Nashville last year, and I don't think anybody at Harvard would have been sore about it, because the guy who scores 30 in college,
yeah,
pretty rare. And to
have a guy this year, Joe, just so dominant.
Oh, he's incredible, and it's he's the reason why Harvard's finally gotten over the hump after all these years of having these great recruiting classes and just never being able to get out of their own way in conference. And then now VZ's on the scene, and he's better than everybody else in the league. I mean, look at last year he won the Walter Brown Award over Eichel, who everybody thought was going to win the award running away, and instead VZ's the guy who gets it. So I mean, he's got the credentials, but I think, Mike, you're right. I mean, you've got the chance to sign with anybody. I mean, the contract's not going to be any different. So unless he doesn't want to be in Nashville, he doesn't want to be in Nashville at all. That's the only reason not to sign. And in this case, I mean, it's, Preds fans, they might have to get ready to be really sore at a kid that, they've been hearing lots of stuff about now for 2 years, who just might not end up being there because he wants to go somewhere else. And I've heard that you guys probably know better, but his father works for the Maple Leafs, so it's one of these things where it's basically greasing the wheels for the Leafs to come in and sign another kid out of college. But I would imagine if he doesn't go with Nashville, he's gonna have 29 teams throwing a contract at him. So not a bad place to be in, but after you do that, it's on you. You have to perform. You have to do it. You have to. You can't show up and not get it done. You have to pull a full Blake Wheeler and just go absolutely bonkers with the opportunity.
And Russ, listen to this, because I laughed at this. This is Poyle again. I can see him starting right out either on Ryan Johansson's line or possibly Mike Fisher's line. So it's like, here's the carrot.
This is the funny thing. For all the time, even earlier in the season when it was so obvious that BC was the best player in college, he never came out and said any of this publicly. He may have been saying it privately, but the funny thing is it really does look like a Hail Mary. And the problem is now, here's the thing. So BC, if I'm thinking like Jimmy BC for a minute, besides knowing that I could play hockey, if I go to Nashville, it's not the best offensive system, even under Laviolette. I can go to Toronto and I have Mike Babcock. See, I don't know. I mean, that's all of a sudden a big consideration now too, and so I think that plays into it, and other teams too. There may be a few others that he's interested in. He'll probably talk to 4 or 5 teams before he ever makes a decision. The Jankowski one I think is the one that gets a little less traction, but he's had a heck of a year, as Joe would know. Joe follows college, and it really started last year. Last year he really started to come on. This year he's built on it. And now, again, while Calgary has sort of just had little undertones that they want them, they have not done what these players want them to do. Say, hey, this is how we're going to utilize you. This is where we picture you to be. And maybe Calgary didn't do it last year because Calgary was flying high. Now that they're not flying so high, maybe they should have included that in the spiel in the offseason, because that's what these kids want. That's the one risk when you sign the college superstar. If you don't get them locked up after like that second year, then you better make that kid feel really welcome. You better tell him exactly what he wants to hear, and then you better follow through with it.
Yeah, and I know that Nashville approached VC last year after his junior year, probably didn't give him all the enticements, like burning a year of the contract and things of that nature. I know that Toronto, when they signed Casey Bailey, who was a college free agent undrafted, they played him 9 games at the end of the year. They burned the first year. So they used and organizations like that, and right now the Leafs are in the midst of a rebuilding situation, so they're almost a clean slate. They will bend over backwards to get a player like VC, and not only is his dad a scout, but his brother was drafted by them 2 years ago. He's at the University of Maine right now. So there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's not a guarantee. It's not. There's no guarantee that Steven Stamkos is going to Toronto. There's no guarantee that Jimmy VC is going to Toronto.
No, but with Schultz and the last couple of years, the defenseman who was Minnesota,
Mike Riley. Yeah.
Mike Riley. we're starting to see this becoming a little bit more of a trend, right, Joe? I mean, it's starting to become a thing.
Kevin,
that's the trouble when you're drafting these kids at 18 years old and they go to college. Like, you're not totally sure what they're, because they're more often than not, they're not first or second round guys. They're guys that you're picking. You're like, all right, well, we can, let them go to college, let them see how they're going to do. And some of these guys, they blow up in college. Like, VC, I think the way he's played the last 2 seasons, it's kind of come out of the blue, honestly. And I mean, he was great with the USA program and whatnot, but it's one of these things where sometimes these guys get so good in college and they arrive on the scene so quickly, and you're kind of stuck and you're like, whoa, we weren't expecting this. And then suddenly the guy's like, well, maybe you should have signed me already. I could have been doing this for your farm team, could have been doing this elsewhere, whatever it is. And I think for, in these cases, this is what you're seeing. And, these guys are taking advantage, being able to do something as kids that no other kids, like no other like junior players or any of them, they don't get to do this. They don't get the chance to be able to explore their options and get away from an organization that maybe they weren't happy being drafted by in the first place.
Well, guys, great show. Looking at the schedule tonight, only 3 games on the list. I'd say the game of the night is probably Detroit and Tampa Bay, but I think Buffalo and Montreal will have a little bit of interest as well, especially with Montreal losing last night in Philadelphia. If they continue their downturn, I think the Bell Center there'll be pitchforks and mannequins being burned in effigy outside of the Bell Center for Mr. Tarian's demise, but we shall see what happens. Thanks a lot, guys. For Joe Yurden, for Russ Cohen, this is Michael Agello. Thanks for watching the Hockey Buzzcast, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.